Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being in our session and for being part of today's really great discussions. I'm Susan Evans-McClure. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Arts Council. I'm really happy to be here with you today to talk about one of my favorite topics, communicating research. So it's great to do high-quality research. It happens at UVM. It happens at a lot of our NGOs and research institutions across the state. It happens at other higher ed institutions across Vermont. But if we do the research and then no one knows about it, is the bear you-know-whatting in the woods. So what we're going to talk about today is how we do that, how we get people invested in this work, how we communicate it. And I think this conversation has an even more kind of important resonance in the moment we're in today, right? Some of the greatest innovations and inventions in American history and public health and how our society works and our democratic governance have come out of publicly funded research at our universities across the country. And we're in a moment where it's clear that people don't know that that's happening and don't value it in a way that it's benefiting them. So part of our conversation today will be to highlight the really great work happening right here in Vermont with our incredible panel, and to get all of you thinking about how you can be communicating the great work that you are doing as well. So we're going to talk up here for a bit, and then we're going to have a workshop led by the incredible Jen Berger, who's back there. Do you want to wave, Jen? Jen's right there. So you should also stay for the workshop coming up after. And we'll talk a bit up here, then we'll wrap up things with some questions. So also, please keep your questions in mind, and we'll come to them at the end of our panel, too. So I'm joined this morning by three incredible Vermonters. Sitting next to me here is Ben Cooley, who's a research data visualization engineer, which they will explain to you exactly what that means. And Ben works here at UVM in the Vermont Complex Systems Institute and the Center for Community News. Across on the other couch is Karen Anderson, who's the Director of Radio Programming and Operations at Vermont Public. Just radio? Yes, that's your title. Okay, great, nailed it. And at the end is Christopher Kojzar, who's an assistant professor at the UVM College of Arts and Sciences, and a really talented artist as well. So we're excited to see some of Chris's work today, too. So we're going to start off by having each of our panelists just share an example of a project you've worked on where you've taken really complex research and communicated it in a way that just absolutely nailed it. You feel like it really met the goals that you had, really met the needs of your audience. And because these are pre-prepared questions, no one is scared by that. And we're going to start with Ben. So we're going to start with Ben.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. So I wanted to share a project. This was before my time at UVM, but it was a project I did with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Any birders out there in the audience? Yeah, great. So they partnered with over 50 different organizations to start an advocacy campaign for a new piece of legislation called the National Grasslands Conservation Act. It's modeled after the National Wetlands Conservation Act, which was passed in the 80s. And they had all of this research and tons of data. If anyone's used Bird or any of the birding apps, you know there's tons of data about where birds are migrating, where there's an upward trend in species. So I was approached to help them kind of tell this story and create an advocacy tool which communicated how much grasslands we've lost in the United States. Since about the 1960s, we've lost about 62% of all grasslands in the US, which has contributed to a 53% loss on average in bird species. Obviously, Cornell's very interested in protecting birds, but we wanted this to be a broad coalition. So among the 50 organizations that we partnered with were Trout Unlimited, the Kansas Farmers Union, the Xerxes Society, which is there to protect insects and invertebrates, Pheasants Forever, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I just read a few of these groups to communicate that these were all people with very different interests. And the kind of Venn diagram of those interests were protecting grasslands. If there's, I think it's one more slide. Yeah, so we designed this website which tries to visualize and communicate just the scope of loss. And our target audience here was really not scientists. It was everyday people who were going to reach out to their representatives and their senators and say, we support the passing of this act. Legislators, and people in these organizations. So as you scroll through the map, you see the kind of dramatic loss across the country, really big swaths of the Southeast, of the West, of the Midwest too. The green patches are replaced by these big stretches of white. So we wanted something that wasn't focused on the statistics, it was more focused on the visuals and really created an impactful, memorable moment for people to walk away with.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. So really taking that coalition, starting with the research, taking a coalition of partners, and then using data visualization tools to make the case for, I mean, it's pretty compelling. Wait, I think I can go back. Is pretty striking to encourage people to use that data to take action in their own lives. Awesome.
And I will say, too, if you want to visit the website, it's mapforgrasslands.org, and you can see a little bit more of the tactics. Maybe something we'll get into later is how we highlighted like individual animal species. So there's 15 different species that we try to tell the story of to make it more grounded in reality.
Great, thank you. Karen, what's an example of it from your work?
Yeah, great question. So taking complex ideas and issues and making them understandable and accessible is the work that we do in journalism every single day. But I do have a couple of examples that I wanted to highlight. The first here is Cartoon Lola. This is Lola Dufour, who is our education reporter at Vermont Public. And last summer, she made this excellent animation with our digital team, really taking education funding, education spending, and explaining it and making it accessible. If you have some time later today, you should go to our website and check it out. It's about 6 minutes. It's very well done. Maybe there will be another one coming soon, given the recent news with education funding there. Another example that I wanted to share comes from a program called One Small Step. How many of you here have heard of StoryCorps before? Okay. How many of you listen on Friday mornings and have tissues ready? These stories are so moving. StoryCorps has been bringing people together since the early 2000s with the hope of creating the largest audio archive in the country. And to date, they have well over 700,000 recordings. Now, back in 2016, David Isay, who's the founder of StoryCorps, decided that the country needed something different. So he developed a program called One Small Step, which brings people together across the divide, across the political divide, in a facilitated conversation with structure and ground rules in a very safe environment. So that's taking something that could potentially be very, very difficult and painful and making it accessible to everyday, ordinary people. Vermont Public has had the privilege of participating in One Small Step twice now, back in 2021, and then again last year. And we're continuing the work around the state by doing workshops, teaching people these skills so that we can have civil discourse again across the divide. So those are two just very concrete examples, but there are many, many more if you listen to Vermont Public Radio or watch Vermont Public Television or check out our digital services. You'll find many, many examples.
That's great. Thanks, Karen. And really starting with the expertise and research around facilitation, around what it means to have conversations and bring people together, and then creating a program where that is accessible to people is really powerful. Chris, I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I want to go back to what Susan was asking, this question of basically, if we do all this work and no one sees it, where does it land? And I feel like that question resonates with me because a student once asked me that in a workshop, like, what if you did a bunch of artwork and no one ever saw it? And they were coming from a perspective of saying, who is the art for, right? Like, is it for myself? Is it for an audience? Is it for maybe a group of people? And I found that question to be very interesting, also because I had to answer it, right? They didn't have to answer it. And so they had their own preconceived notion of what that question meant. And I think that a lot of times we try to display things in a very public way, especially as artists, to gain recognition. And so just going into that, maybe it's not a segue, it's just something that came into my head, because I do public art, and I think a lot of people do see it, and I do art in public spaces. And so the piece you're seeing here is actually just from so many different iterations of being in public space. And I'm always questioning like what it means to do this kind of work for a broad audience. And this piece has very like personal reasons. You know, I create art for myself, and then I start to create work to get called into community rather than call people in, to get to learn about other people and the reasons and motivations and intentions for why things exist. So this piece here will be going up in August of 2025 at basically right outside of the City Place development. And so, you know, the developers, I think, have different intentions for having public art than the artists. We kind of might be doing this for various reasons, not necessarily for commercial good. I do this workshop where I show the budget of this project and how much I don't make, but how big the budget is, right? Like, and this is actually a very small budget in comparison to some other things. So it becomes questionable, almost like if your value in doing artwork to me can rest in various spheres. And so if you're doing it for it to be seen, it doesn't necessarily equate to value added in commercial ways, whereas for other people it might be. So the project, and you can go to the next slide, the project I worked on prior to that, this piece kind of holds some weight with me because this is kind of reduced to just what it is, like a drawing where it's contained in a frame, and there's a process where I just take a CNC router and cut out everything that's just blank page, so that you only see what I drew when someone actually came up to me to ask me where their wallet was, and they were asking me in French in Montreal. And luckily I speak enough French where I was like, oh, I don't know. And also this project has like a large history of like going back to French culture and loitering and being on street corners, taking long drags of short cigarettes while you wait and just look like you're up to no good. So I like this drawing a lot, but there's like a whole series of them, and it's based around this idea that just being in public space, particularly as a black person, might give some preconceived notion that you're suspicious or you're up to no good. And I root it back to the anti-terrorism campaign of See Something, Say Something, which is based in New York, which actually still lists on the federal websites, the Department of Homeland Security, and it was off actually for about 4 years. I don't think you can probably guess which 4 years it was off, but it basically says that sketching or note-taking is enough of some reason for someone to come up to you and ask what you're doing. So it could be seen as a suspicious activity. So I've taken note-taking and sketching buildings in public space as a way to more or less troll on people who want to come up and talk to me. So if you see me in public space, you want to talk to me, just know that like I'm doing that as like a performing non-performance. It's very singularly me being in my head about how people like, I guess, approached me, from police officers to even in Burlington, people screaming that I'm a terrorist in City Hall Park. And so there's like a reason for this, but there's also an absurd humor to it that I find extremely engaging. And I link it back to a lot of other, it's recognizably, there's a reason for this. There have been indications in like the 1992 World Trade Center bombing where, or even prior to that, where people would sketch buildings as like a way to like case a joint. Or case out an area, so they've worked it into the system. And there's also There's just a whole history of it, but I take it even further back to look at like when does it become a recognition of private autonomy versus like public good or public safety. So yeah, that's me.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that and for sharing your work. I think, yep, there we go. So I was really excited to be asked to moderate this panel, not only to get to hang out with these wonderful people, but because while I'm the director of the Vermont Arts Council now, my career for 20 years before this has been working in museums, developing public programming and public exhibitions, trying to connect Americans with the ideas of the complexity of American history. So my specific area is in how people learn American history through performance. So one of the things I am always thinking about is how are people engaging with whatever it is we're doing? How are you, the audience, part of our performance that we're up here doing today? And when you take really complicated research and then you present that out to the public, there's an exchange that happens. But before you can even have that exchange, you have to know where to start. So where do you all start in that process?
Maybe I can go first, I guess, and circle back. So my role as a data visualization engineer is to basically take a lot of numbers or data, it could be text data, and turn it into something visual and something that maybe a scientist or a data analyst or data scientist could understand, right? So before I came to UVM, I was working for the Breakout Institute, which is a research institute in Cambridge, Massachusetts, studying genetics and genomics. And my background is in journalism, actually. That's how I started my career. I started to transition more into data visualization. So genetics is like not my thing at all. Like biology was not my strong suit. And even for that matter, statistics was never really my strong suit either. So how I start is talking to the scientists that I'm working with, the researchers, and I just say, I need you to explain it very, very simply for me so that I can explain it simply for someone else. And I think that process of like breaking it down into the simplest visual form is really helpful for the audience, obviously, but also for the researcher and scientist, because a lot of researchers, frankly, don't have the incentive to simplify things. Like there's not really an incentive or payout for them to do so, to get published in a journal. And so the more incentives we can provide for scientists to create a distilled version of their research, the better. I mean, I was reminded the other day of this statistic that the average reading level of an adult in the US is, does anyone know? 8th grade, 12, 13 years old. So if we want to reach people, then we have to always be keeping that in mind. And a lot of my work is how do I take something that might feel intimidating and complex and create a visualization that is a little more accessible and friendly. And to do that, I have to understand it first before someone else can.
I love that. And then public art, public media, there's the shared ethos that we want the public involved in this. There's a lot of things that happen in academia where that is not the focus of the audience, but then there are people who are working with that deeply held belief that having the public involved in whatever conversation it is a net good for society. So where do you guys start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we start with our audience, knowing Vermonters, knowing what you all need us to be covering, and keeping you safe. We keep that at the forefront of what we do. And I think of Vermont Edition. I think of our daily call-in program and how we attempt to bring you experts in issues, but also bring you the voices of everyday Vermonters. It's that mix of lived experience paired with the experts on certain issues. And I think that's really, really important. I think that's something that public media can do really well. You all, Vermont Public exists for you and because of you. Especially now, with federal funding at risk, Vermont Public is you. And so we want to make sure you all are reflected in our coverage. And we do that a number of ways, through call-in shows, through surveys, through community advisory boards, through getting out into the community. That is vitally important. If we just, become this echo chamber of reporting on what we think is important, then that's not truly reflective of what you all need from us. So it's something that we strive to do every day, staying connected with our audience, what your needs are, and how we can best serve you all.
Okay, yeah, there it goes. I think that, honestly, the idea of academia, and academia is part, like, it's made of people, and people are we're also part of the public. So when I first moved here in 2021, I immediately went into our academic community to understand the lay of the land. So with this public art engagement, because a couple of the projects are in Vermont, I reached out to other professors. So on one project, it was Pablo Bos, who then connected me with a former UVM student, Elise Guillet, who was a historian, and she directed my proposal in a way, even though it didn't get picked up, it made me understand a history of a place way more than I could ever get just by walking the area. And then for this piece, Jen Berger, who's doing the workshop, was instrumental in giving me kind of like an idea of the community engagement part, because Jen is so involved on so many levels with Burlington, with Winooski, and understanding from her point of view, what could be a way to grow from this, from just getting the commission. How could it involve people? Because honestly, Burlington is, people like to know what's going on. It's a very active, politically, in so many ways, it's very active. So when something comes up in a space, people like to know about it and be a part of it. So I think that connection with people here at the university helps me kind of figure out where to go and take the steps to connect with other people outside of the university, since often I see that people from the outside see us as like this place on a hill that is very much, there's a drawn line, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you all brought out the power of kind of thinking interdisciplinarily, not just working that way, but valuing what different perspectives are bringing to the projects that you're putting together, kind of knowing that the whole is going to be greater than the sum of those parts. And when you do start this work, right, even no matter who you're working with, we are all bringing some sort of lens to the work we're doing from our personal experiences. So how do you acknowledge that or make space for that, or how does that lens show up in your work? You don't have to go in order. It can be whoever wants to answer.
I'll start, yeah. I'll go the other way, or whatever. I'm not going to direct if you guys. Yeah. So I was just kind of thinking about this question because it goes back to this idea of what the art is meant to. My research and my artwork are different things, and when I do this, and it's particularly for the field of visual art. So you're consuming or understanding or emotionally, reading something with your eyes rather than reading something like in verbal or listening, methods. So I don't want to talk too much about the work anymore, because it takes the magic away from the work. So I see a lot, I remember this growing up, a lot of artists would talk about process behind how the work was made rather than the intention behind why the work was made. And that was very dry to me. That was very, wasn't giving any indication of the spiritual resonance behind it or the emotional reason or the messiness of life. And with artwork, there's a lot of messiness and there's a lot of, you fall on your face often. You always have to get up metaphorically. We're very delicate flowers, but as artists. But we have to have thick skin too, And in that, I think that thick skin comes from constantly there's like judgment placed on the intention behind something. So, just to kind of like clarify on that, it's just to me communicating what I don't say sometimes makes for stronger work. And if I do say more, it does tend to just like, it makes it very diluted, so.
Yeah, that question about what not to say, right? There's so many things to say in the world. I could talk for days and days, but I think the hard part of all of our work as communicators is to decide what not to say. And it's hard. You're right. I love that you said delicate artists are delicate flowers. You know, sometimes researchers are delicate flowers. They've dedicated their life and their work to this pursuit of knowledge and creating new knowledge, and that's really powerful. It is really hard to be the person to look at them and say, nah, we're not going to include that. We're actually only going to say 10 words and just move on. So that's something I just say that because it's hard for us too. To cut your work is just as hard. But it is something that we all think about, I think, kind of what not to say too. Yeah, did you want to add anything, Ben?
Yeah, I think to your question about the lens that we bring, you know, as someone who thinks very visually, that's kind of my first idea is to take a data set and make a visualization, and that will summarize it, right? But acknowledging that there are also ways that can hide and obfuscate data as well, and being transparent about that. There's this wonderful book by Alberto Cairo called How Charts Lie, if anyone's interested. It has all these incredible examples of these visualizations, which a lot of people inherently trust because they associate it with science and they associate it with research. But if you do tricky things like you truncate the axis or you kind of like hide the labels, you can have totally different interpretation of the data. So I think as researchers and communicators, it's our responsibility to not only, you know, be truthful with the data and communicate it visually in a responsible way, but also be transparent about the source of the data and make that public and accessible. You know, I think that all of the data that we can reasonably do so, you know, as long as there's no HIPAA, you know, violations or whatever, should be open source and available for people to download. Shout out to Verso. Kendall Fortney runs Vermont Open Source, and we're trying to do a lot of that work here at UVM.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I have a few thoughts. So to answer the lens question first, the hope as a journalism organization is that we are looking at things through the lens of the communities that we serve, right? Very hard to do, but that is what we strive to do. When I think of what to say and what not to say, we have a great team of editors in our newsroom who are helping with that. But I have the privilege of working with the on-air announcers. So Mary Engish, who you hear in the afternoon, and Jen Jarecki. And it is a challenge to be a host. You want to have something we refer to in public radio as hostiness. So we want the listeners to feel like that host is their companion and their friend. So we want our hosts to give you a little bit of themselves, but not so much that you know what they're thinking or where they stand on an issue. So that is a line we have to walk very carefully as journalists, is to make sure we're giving you the information, we're giving you a little personality in the mix as well, but we're not telling you what to think or sharing our personal opinions. Yeah.
Yeah, do you feel like the skills you're talking about are all important communication skills? They're not necessarily, I mean, I think they're core to good research, but they're not necessarily like how to collect the data kind of skills. I will say personally, I've been in many rooms where that skill did not feel valued, and often like you were fighting for your way in to say, no, actually, we need to think about the public. No, actually, we needed to think about how we're going to talk about this. Do you feel like that's changed? This was not on the list, so, but do you feel like that's changed at all in the course of your experience in this? Do you feel like those skills are valued? Do you feel like that's changing kind of now in the moment we're in?
Maybe anecdotally, I could say, at least here at UVM, I mean, the position that I'm filling was sort of created for that purpose. So I hope I can help fill that role, right? I don't know how to speak kind of to the larger question, I guess. I think that the way that we talk about, like we were talking about in the keynote panel, right? The level of trust in science and institutions is going down. And the way that we communicate about the research that we're doing, I think there's more of an openness to different methods of communication. That could be visualization, it could be, doing videos for social media, it could be other multimedia forms of storytelling. I do think we're seeing more of that. I think that's done so much better when there's an interdisciplinary effort to do so. So scientists and researchers have so much they're already doing, to ask them to also produce all of their own content and do everything is a lot to ask of anyone. And so as much as we can build interdisciplinary teams where people can come along scientists, help them simplify their message, help them kind of repackage it for multiple different audiences, multiple different platforms, the more effective we're going to be at communicating.
Yeah, I can jump in quickly. So, now that Vermont Public is multi-platform, we are on TV, we are on radio, we are on digital, we are trying to be wherever you are. That is very, very exciting work. It's also challenging because each of our platforms have very unique audiences. And I'll just share one example. For instance, our audience for television is almost the exact opposite composition of our audience for radio. I live in Swanton, Vermont, which is admittedly very different from Chittenden County. So our TV audience up in Franklin County, we have a huge television audience, but our radio audience, we have some room to grow in Franklin County. So yeah, it's a challenging work knowing your audience and knowing how they're utilizing all the different platforms, and then trying to figure out how you can reach them through those different platforms. But we want to be where you are, and that is changing rapidly. We are trying to figure out how to be on TikTok and Instagram. I'm 47 years old. These things are new for me. I'm learning from my children, from my teenagers, how to engage on all of these social media platforms. So it's exciting work, but challenging as well.
Susan, could you just repeat the question just one more time?
Oh, I think if our kind of the way researchers maybe value this role of communication, if you've seen that change at all, or if there is a new value in the moment we're living in.
Okay. So I imagine you guys are coming at it almost from the world is changing, I'm catching up almost, and I have other roles to take. And I think it is funny how fast everything's going. I guess what's also, we're in that fastness all the same. So we all have to speak our languages to other people, right? So if I'm speaking to an engineer, for instance, it takes me about, 5 to 10 minutes to kind of get humbled, and also not to be on the defensive. Because I work with engineers a lot, because they have their own way of communicating, right? So that has been the hardest for me. It's not so much, I actually try to pull back from social media, but to my detriment probably, and that's a whole other job, I feel like, and it is a job, but really communicating just, face to face without, specifically in my work, because it's always changing, how to kind of engage collaboratively, like you said, like a team, interdisciplinary, with interdisciplinary methods, when we're all speaking different languages, quite honestly. So that to me is the biggest challenge, because we're all trying to move towards maybe some kind of, for lack of a goal. At the same time, everyone has their own kind of preconditions for what that looks like, or their lens, what that looks like. So yeah, that's been hardest.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to ask you all one last question, and then we'll have some time for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, I am looking at a microphone back there, but you can think about your question and be ready to ask it. So if you all, as very talented professionals, could wave a magic wand and make kind of all academic research usable, shareable, consumable, applicable in our lives, what would that look like?
I can take a first crack at it. So I guess two things come to mind. One is kind of structural, and the other is practical. I'm relatively new to academia kind of full time. So this first item, I have no idea how it would work. But I do think there needs to be more of a incentive, both financial and for kind of career reputation for scientists and researchers to publish their research outside of academic journals. I've worked with so many talented people who are studying really interesting things, and as soon as the paper is accepted, it's just done. Like maybe they build on it in the future, and I'm thinking like, you generated this original data set, it's so cool, like let's build this thing together, but they have other obligations because they're going for tenure or whatever it is. So there needs to be more incentive. The practical thing, which is something that I try to do quite often with people at Complex Systems and other groups I work with, is just having these kind of simplified visual abstracts for your research and your papers. So creating like a simple one-page website, and it has very basic, again, 8th grade reading level type language for the public to engage with your research. It doesn't have all the details, like what not to say. Like you don't need to say absolutely everything. And packaging that up so that it's an entry point into your researchers. And then people in the business community and other communities are more kind of welcomed into that circle. So as much as we can get other communicators, artists, designers, engineers to partner with researchers to create these kind of post-research publication tools and websites, I think the wider our circle becomes.
Yeah, I'm going to jump off of what you said, Ben, as well, because, like I said earlier, this is the work of journalism every day, taking complex research and ideas and trying to make it accessible. But I think one thing that we could all improve upon is, we get tons of press releases every day. We get lots of emails filled with information that's really exciting and interesting, things happening around the state that we want to be able to highlight. Sometimes we have to read those things like 5 or 6 times before we really understand, okay, what is this saying? So I think if we could get to a point where what's the elevator pitch here? How do you say this in 30 seconds? And then share that information so that we can then take it and make it accessible for literally hundreds of thousands of people who are listening and watching and consuming our various platforms.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I'm so glad you said that. I feel like the question, what is this, is so important. And if you can't answer that question, that's not an option. And if you have to be able to say, this is what this is. There's a series of questions that I've often used in museum, exhibit, and program design. And the first one is, what is it? And if you can't answer that, stop until you can answer that. Why are we doing this? And if you can't answer that, stop again. Who is it for, to define your audience? And then what will happen if we don't do it? And that question, I think, can be really powerful too, because sometimes the answer is nothing. And if the answer to what will happen if we don't do it is nothing, then maybe that's not the thing that you highlight. So I love asking those 4 questions. It's really helped me kind of shape a lot of museum work too. Chris, do you want to wave your magic wand and solve all of our problems?
I go back to what Benjamin was saying, maybe a bit of financial transparency within the university structure. So we're talking kind of about public research here, and I imagine private research to be anything from defense, biometrics, biomedical, things that might need intellectual property rights for private monetary expansion of the university budget, or for their researchers, or for their, I'm an artist in a way that people think that it's very our intellectual property, right, our ideas, our field, we're probably some of the lowest paid people on campus. And, you know, I don't know what to say about that except that, you know, but but for the other side of it, if all research is supposed to be usable and shareable, I guess it's back like, what research are you talking about? Are you talking about, yeah, like biometric research at a university? Because if it's security based, then it's a little bit more nuanced, so.
I love that you brought up the transparency of funding processes too, because I think, you know, I think Quebec does this really well in their many transportation projects. Like you drive through a construction site in Quebec and there's a big sign that says, paid for with your taxes. That just having this comfort level with explaining like, no, this university exists in part, not totally. We really appreciate all of the private support too, but in part because of public funding. Our work as the Vermont Arts Council exists because Americans pay their taxes, and then we elect people who make decisions about how that funding is spent. And those decisions include supporting funding of the arts for all Americans. And then that funding goes to state arts councils, and we distribute that out to the public. So making sure that all of us as American citizens have a responsibility to say, this is what we pay taxes for because this is the society that we want to live in. Normalizing that, I think, will go a long way towards changing some of the culture around why we fund research, why we don't, why we value it too. So are there any questions in the audience that folks want to ask? Someone has stood up in the back and is walking to the microphone. If you have a question, I think Michelle is walking around and she can, do you want people to line up at the mic, Michelle? What's the best way to do it? Yes, okay, line up at the microphone if you have questions. Go ahead.
Hi. AI is pushing us to be more creative. Where do you idealize the practice?
Sorry, go on.
AI is pushing us to be more creative. Where do you idealize the practice of communicating visual narratives in the next decade to come?
All right, we got less than 10 minutes, and the question is, how is AI changing the way we communicate visually? Maybe we can table like value judgments on that and just say that it is, and maybe predict a little about where you think, how you think it is.
Storytelling is going to be very important, already is. So whatever AI is doing, it can't tell your story. You have to tell your story, and then you have to be a part of a group of people who has, you know, stories to tell and wants to be recorded.
Yeah, if you, I mean, it comes back to the like, what is it question. If you can't put the words or the text or the voice in there to answer what is it, the technology is a tool. So it'll only be a tool to what you are putting in it.
I could not say it any better than Chris did.
I think that AI is certainly making things quicker to do, but I think that maybe this is just my personal hope. I think people's kind of AI slop detectors are are going to get better. Yeah, just to Chris's point, as much as we can, you know, center the story and the storytelling, and maybe it will actually lead to a resurgence in people wanting to go to museums, and be in physical spaces rather than like being bombarded online with AI content.
Yes, next question.
You've talked a lot about the messenger and the message in effective communications. I'm curious what your thoughts are on context, and in particular, trust in the context in which a message is delivered. And I'll give one very quick example. I work for Front Porch Forum, and a lot of UVM researchers use Front Porch Forum to recruit participants for their studies because they get a high return rate, and I think that has to do with the trust that is inherent in that context in Front Porch Forum. Expand on that. How do you think about contextual trust when you're thinking about effectiveness of communication?
Yeah, that's such an important question. I think how does the context of where and how all of these important things we've talked about are being communicated, how does that impact what's being received, especially now, right, when there's huge changes around trust and truth and the idea of the idea of knowledge and truth existing. Again, we have 5 minutes, so Karen, do you want to take that from a public media perspective?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So we could not do what we do without the trust of the public. You trust us to do the research, to do the hard work of journalism, to bring you news that we attempt it to be fair and balanced, to keep you informed, to keep you safe. So public media literally depends on trust. You trust us to bring you that information. We trust you all to fund it and to keep watching and listening and consuming it. So yeah, without trust, we would not exist.
And Chris, that made me think of some of the work that you've talked about, the last example you shared too, just around ideas around trusting the government and relationships around that, like how we're communicating things. You use that great example of drawing in public, right? Like that there's different connotations of that, and can you say a little more about that?
I grew up in a very government centered area, the DMV area, basically in Maryland and Baltimore. It's like heavily surveilled. Front Porch Forum was the first news source I looked at to get my bearings in this town. And I guess even looking at the context of trust within maybe higher structures as you go up, I had to establish maybe like a consistent. I had to force myself to go out a lot to figure out who was here and figure out who makes up the community. Like, get to know the weirdness of Burlington. It's kind of like that was getting. That's where the trust came from, like understanding contextually how weird people can be. And then if you know, you know. I don't know. Like if you know the right people, the right, not even the right people. If you just if you know something, you know something because you consistently show up, and that's how you establish trust. But I'm still I think from that. I'm very paranoid all the time. I don't know. That's that's very open to say. I don't really trust a lot of things. I'm always on guard. I'd rather be not so defensive and more cultivating. But yeah.
All right, we have just a few more minutes, so I think we'll probably have time for maybe one more question. We're happy to chat after for the other questions, but we're going to make this our last question at the microphone.
Great. One of the aspects I think often gets lost between the journal article and the science communication is the limitations of the data and like the overall uncertainty of science. Dr. Becker talked about how public trust in science went down during the COVID pandemic, and I think that's because we were all in a giant science experiment, and what was failed to be communicated was the fact that our understanding was going to change, right? So as science communicators, what strategies have you found for maintaining that understanding of the iterative nature of science and that what our conclusions might change as time goes on?
I think I'll expand that too to that the fact that our knowledge base changes over time is also true in the humanities. I think that's something that's often lost about history and studying history in the humanities. So how do you tackle that? This idea that knowledge changes over time, what we know today, ideally what we know today will not be what we know tomorrow. And so how do you communicate that complexity?
I mean, a big part, I think, of this question is also communicating uncertainty, right? Which is really difficult, and especially in the sciences, people have a hard time understanding probabilities, let alone uncertainty, which is its own, version of probabilities. I think when it comes to communicating with data, which is what I think about a lot, I think it comes back to transparency and communicating kind of the uncertainty within what we found in a study, right? So not oversimplifying it. To use a practical example, like taking off, the confidence interval bars or whatever, and not showing the outliers. I think we need to trust the public a little bit more than we do, and I think during COVID pandemic times, I think scientists probably did not trust the public enough in that sense, and thought we needed to just provide a unified message, even if that unified message is kind of hiding what we don't totally know for sure. And so it looked really bad when they had to like, backpedal on some things. So as communicators, I think we need to be honest about like, this is what we found, but this is what we don't know. And here's our margin of error. And, it doesn't mean we're wrong if it's within the margin of error. It just means that that's how we do science.
I'll also add that one of the strongest values of learning in and through the arts is comfort with not knowing, with understanding that, as Chris was saying, like, there are very few things that are settled. There are lots of things that are messy. That is inherently what makes humanity. I think that's what makes it amazing, right? That's like the fun stuff that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the person next to us is going to do. And learning to really revel in that and celebrate it, I think, is at the core of arts education. So I love that our panel really got into the value of interdisciplinary learning, thinking, and communicating, because to me, that's what it's all about. None of us can exist as researchers, as scientists, as historians, as human beings. We can't exist in separate lanes for the rest of time. So when we think about communicating, what we're really thinking about doing is how do we bring together all of our strengths as human beings and present them to other people so that we can all be getting better as a society. So thank you all for being part of that in the work that you do and in being here today. A big thank you to our amazing panel and to the Leahy Institute. And we look forward to seeing you at the next workshop as well. Thanks, everyone.